I just actually want to say that we're very, very grateful for all the information you've given us. Terribly impressed by all the research that you do and the way that you run your patient group. And although we're looking at 3 elements in this review, Primados only has one patient group, and that is yours, and it's hugely effective. And you are greatly admired by the way that you run it. So we've had the opportunity of meeting some of your members, and that's been really useful to us. We've also met some of the young people now who've been affected by Primados, and that was hugely important when you came last time, and we saw Daniel Mason and Nikki Govin, and had great insight from them as to what their lives are like, and really admired their courage and the way that they manage their lives, which were obviously very tricky.
Very impressive.
So thank you for your evidence, and we know last time you were very rushed, and you didn't really have the opportunity you hoped you would have. And as it's the only patient group, we felt it was quite right that you should come back again. And of course you know that it's going to be screened, this session, and put on our website, because one of the things that we were determined was that working with patients and patient groups, we would be totally transparent. And we are also, with our oral hearings now, interviewing all sorts of organisations who have had a part in the review in terms that they've been the regulator or the manufacturer or the just part of the NHS. And so we're going through those at the moment, and we will be going on into March, April, May with those interviews. And again, they'll all be on the website for those who want to see it. So I know that you've got something you want to, testimony you want to give us. But prior to that, is there any question you'd like to ask me before we start?
No, I would actually like to say, though, that this is the first review team that's ever actually looked at the people, not just at the statistics, not at scientific evidence, but actually taking the time to speak with people, which is so important, and quite honestly have made such a great difference to the way that they feel, both about themselves and about the fact that they're being listened to. So that's been hugely important, and on behalf of them all, I would say thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And I have to say, we couldn't have done this review without them. They have been amazing, and we have learnt so much. But as we're going to start screening now, perhaps you could just say who you are and your organisation, so that when it goes up on the screen, people will know who you are and why you're here. Right. Okay, so it's over to you.
Okay.
And I'll just say, you're now filming. Yes.
My name is Mary Lyon. I'm the chair of the Association for Children we believe have been damaged by hormone pregnancy tests. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity again today to speak about the ongoing issues surrounding the oral hormone pregnancy tests. It was actually my original intention to highlight the serious failings of our regulatory authorities, and particularly the MHRA and the CHM, Commission of Human Medicines and Medical Healthcare Regulatory Agency. But after viewing the oral evidence presented by members of the expert working group, who were responsible for the scientific publication in 2017, it seems I already have a perfect example of the denial and protection culture endemic in our regulators. Denial when problems occur, and protection not for the patient but for the manufacturer. I refer to statements made in the oral evidence presented by members of the EWG who were responsible for that scientific report. And the report concluded that there was no association between HPTs and adverse effects. That was quite equivocal. I need to make it clear that in the conclusions of the report, the group did not state there was a possible association or If there was an association, it was a weak one. The conclusion was absolutely unequivocal, no association. And also the statement I would challenge is that no group member had a conflict of interest. It's disingenuous at best. I did challenge the involvement of 2 members of the panel virtually immediately that review started. One had produced a scoping study on HPTs which concluded there was no association between HPTs and adverse effects in pregnancy, and women should be reassured by this evidence. This conclusion was posted on a BUMPS website, which is for pregnant women. Now, this was posted before the completion of the expert working group, and yet that person was allowed to stay within that group. Another member of the expert working group was a German professor who produced a study on HPTs included, again, in the expert working group evidence and referenced many times by the MHRA presenter as credible and robust. This professor personally gave evidence during a legal challenge on Duganon, which is the same as Primados in Germany, stating there was no association between HPTs and adverse effects. He was also, believe it or not, remunerated by Bayer for work he produced for them in 2012. He later admitted at a public scientific conference last year he had manipulated figures in his study. That man again was allowed to attend. A third member of the group was a German scientist who studied at the same university as a prominent shearing scientist who was instrumental in producing studies repudiating a link to adverse effects for shearing. I actually had a personal verbal attack from this person during one of the meetings relating to the Landesarchive documents, which he did not believe existed. This actually prompted me to ask him, had he ever worked with this scientist? And he said he didn't even know his name, he denied any knowledge of him, and he then abruptly left the meeting, didn't return, and did not return for any further meetings. I have no evidence of why this happened, but it did happen. The statement again from the expert working group, from Dr. Gebby, was that I was invited to comment after every expert working group meeting. This is absolutely untrue. I was publicly admonished by the chair at the very first meeting when I attempted to question a statement from the MHRA. I was told I should not have attempted to speak as I had observer status only and would not be allowed to contribute unless invited by the chair. I challenged this restriction, which was not as was originally agreed, and I sent that challenge to the MHRA in writing. I did not receive a response. It was only with the assistance of some of the group members that I was able to challenge statements I knew were inaccurate. And actually a barrister acting on behalf of the CHM and MHRA attended subsequent meetings. My request for the same facility for one of our barristers to attend was rejected. Towards the end of the review, I was so concerned by the absence of clarity on the information provided and inaccuracies contained in the presentations to the group, I advised the chair I would be withdrawing from the review. The response I received was exactly this: you would be shooting yourself in the foot if you withdraw now. I considered this remark a positive statement and agreed to continue to attend the meetings. After the publication of the report, I wrote to the chair to challenge this statement she had made about shooting myself in the foot, but again, I did not receive a response to that challenge. I would also like to highlight a remark from Professor Evans, where he said, we included data not included in the meta-analysis produced by Professor Hennigan. The reason this data was not included for Professor Hennigan is because the data was not made available to him. A prime example of protection, but not on behalf of the patients, on behalf of the government regulatory bodies. The APPG supporting our members, the cross-party group, submitted a Freedom of Information request to ask for this raw data to be released. I have also written to the MHRA to request this information twice. I would question why this data was not included on the MHRA website in accordance with its pledge to provide full and transparent disclosure of all evidence. To date, we've still not received this data. Full and transparent disclosure apparently is only at the discretion of the MHRA and Commission on Human Medicines. To ensure that we do have sight of this, I would request, please, from yourselves, assistance in obtaining full transcripts of all minutes relating to the expert working group meetings, which took place between the decision-making panel of the expert working group, the MHRA and the Commission on Human Medicines. In addition, the minutes of the meeting prior to my presentation to the Commission on Human Medicines on the 6th of October and the minutes immediately after my presentation on the same date. I believe this information is in the public interest and must be made available. I must also challenge the statement made by the group in their oral interview, which was astounding. We cannot rule out with any certainty, and there is an association. Everybody admits there is an association, and we never said there was a possible link. Professor Evans stated women who took a HPT would have had reasons for doing so and were different from women who did not take them. Jessie spoke personally with members of the group to ensure they understood that any woman who visited her doctor to find out if she was pregnant either took a urine test, had a physical examination, or was given a hormone pregnancy test, all of which are pregnancy tests. So not only were patients not protected by the regulator, but they are also being blamed for taking the medicines advised by their doctor. And this again is not based on fact, it is an opinion. The assertion by Professor Evans is an insult to our members and compounds the guilt we already feel because we did not question our GP. His view was challenged robustly by Jessie during his presentation to the group in 2017. Our members were not informed they had a choice of pregnancy tests or advised of the risks associated with HPTs. Therefore, they were not provided with the information to make the informed choice Professor Evans accuses them of making. There have been repeated comments by the group on the lack of credible evidence in historical scientific studies, yet evidence of the effects on women who actually took HPTs is discounted. Genetic testing on our members currently shows no genetic fault is responsible. There was no history of miscarriage or abnormalities in prior pregnancies in the majority of our members who were first-time mothers. There is no justification or evidence to support this claim by Professor Evans, but this is another example of denial to protect the regulator. I really don't want to waste any more time responding to those issues as with the oral evidence of the group, but would prefer to address the more important issues concerning historical and current regulatory failures. During my previous oral submission, I presented indisputable evidence about the historic failures of the government, regulatory agencies, and the deliberate suppression of evidence by both the drug company and the authorities. Today, I would like to address the continuing failures of the government health regulators, in particular, the lack of transparency, lack of informed choice, lack of credible independent data on testing results of drugs and devices, and imposed confidentiality agreements, which are designed to withhold information from the public. The incidence of adverse effects will continue to increase unless information is made available to patients immediately a suspicion is raised. Risks and benefits must be re-evaluated after reports of adverse effects and information related to patients at the very first opportunity. The delay by the regulatory authorities in sharing information about ADRs is due to an entrenched reluctance to acknowledge possible harms from a drug or device until protracted investigations have taken place. This is denial of protection at its worst and leaves many patients still at risk, which is evidenced by sodium valproate and surgical mesh. By withholding this vital information from patients, adverse effects are allowed to continue. Warnings are not issued, and there is no system to implement the withdrawal of products until this rigorous retesting has been completed. Failure to inform the patients of the risks impedes the patient's right to make an informed choice, as regulators continue to withhold information on suspected adverse effects. This choice is negated by the actions of the regulator, whose paternalistic, I would actually call it arrogant, approach has no place in medicines today. Patients must be allowed to determine their own health choices. The absence of transparency and openness in the current regulatory process is ill-advised and dangerous, and requires a radical change in regulations which will ensure patient safety is the first priority and not the protection of the manufacturer or the regulator. The regulator needs to change focus, needs to provide funding for independent studies and for rigorous independent testing before accepting a drug or device for patient use. There needs to be an increase in research into the cause of ill health instead of focusing on new, expensive drugs to treat the symptoms and not the cause. To compound these failures, the MHRA and CHM impose stringent confidentiality agreements on participants involved in discussions relating to adverse effects. Reviews are conducted in secret, which ensures information and evidence made available during these discussions are not subjected to public scrutiny. The patient is once again deemed unfit to take full informed decisions on their own health. The regulatory process has got to change. We need a proactive process which keeps patients informed and engaged and ensures patients receive all the information necessary to make the right choices for themselves. We need a top-down independent review of the links between the regulator and the manufacturer. We need to look at the lobbying that goes on, which is available to the medical profession from the manufacturer. But this campaign is not constrained to the UK. There is also a campaign group in Germany who had 615 members. B-Farm at that time had actually received 450 instances of adverse effects. The German group follow our campaign closely, and on the 13th of March I will be meeting with the two main political parties in Berlin, the Green Party and health ministers, to discuss our progress in the UK. This will include presentations by Professor Vargason on the zebrafish research and Professor Ralston on the meta-analysis he produced with Professor Hennigan. The meeting is intended to mobilise the German campaign group and raise awareness of HPTs within the political parties. This scandal is not going to go away. You asked me previously whether the association intended to initiate legal action, and my answer was yes, we do. This legal action is now imminent. SPG Law is a unique law firm whose mission is to achieve justice for claimants around the world against some of the biggest companies in the world. SPG combines the talent of some of the leading solicitors and barristers in the UK with the financial resources and expertise of American class action lawyers. Their statement is, no one intimidates us. No company is too big for us to hold them to account for their wrongdoings. A partner from SPG is flying from America to the UK tomorrow, and I will be meeting with them in the afternoon to discuss plans to initiate legal action on behalf of our association members. It has been a long and difficult fight to bring this issue to the position we're in today, and it is the ultimate example of denial by the regulatory authorities and protection of the manufacturers at all costs. However, in our case, it's a human cost. The heavy responsibility placed on campaigners to provide evidence of harm is another example of the failure by the government health regulators to protect the patient. By continuing to insist we provide scientific evidence, they continue to protect themselves and the manufacturer while refusing to take responsibility for their own failures. That was basically what I wanted to say today, but one thing that I will bring up, if you don't mind, because it was actually mentioned during, I think, Jason Farrell's interview. There was a question, in fact it wasn't, I think it was at our last meeting. Sonny mentioned about 32 times the stronger dose that Neil used in his ad hoc zebrafish study. Neil actually still does not know where that figure came from. He said, I am at a loss to know where it came from. However, he did say it is acknowledged that doses need to be increased. He mentioned the receptors that are not known. And he also said these large doses were used in the science for sodium valproate. Now that science was accepted, but obviously Primados science is not. You also asked at that meeting, have there been regulatory failures? Well, I think we can say yes. When did the regulators and drug companies become aware? They became aware in 1968. 67, sometimes as early as 66. Were women deprived of information to make an informed choice? Yes, we were. You did also say you're not here to judge the science, and I'm quite heartened by that. Again, I know that you attended, Sonny, the zebrafish review, and will be attending the meta-analysis. So I'm assuming that is just in an advisory capacity.
That's an observer status.
Observer status, that's fine. Another question that was asked that didn't seem to have clarity was, when did the public and the doctors know? I think that was in Jason's interview as well. They actually didn't know. In February 1970, I have a copy of a letter which I hope I've sent to you. The Standing Joint Committee contacted Shearings to demand the removal of the indication for pregnancy on Primados, or they would remove the drug altogether from the market. There's a letter quoting Dr. Inman from Shearings where it says, with the approbation of Dr. Inman representing the UK Health Government Authority, the indication was quietly withdrawn without informing anyone in the medical profession, including doctors. The first information came in 1975 when the first warning was actually printed. Until then, it's quite clear in the letter, which had, the only thing is I am really sorry if I haven't sent you all the information you need. My assumption has been, which I should have clarified, that you would have access to all the documents I sent to the expert working group. And if that's, you don't.
No. Well, I don't know if we do. If they are on their annexes and they're displayed on the website, then yes, if they're publicly available, we have.
They should be.
If they are not publicly on the website, then no, we wouldn't have.
Well, maybe I need to look at these things and make sure that you have, you know, full clarity when it comes to these important issues, because it is important. Doctors did not know. And I actually take exception to doctors being blamed to say, well, they were responsible because the indication had been withdrawn, but they were never informed. So my feeling is the doctors were incentivised, but in good faith, I feel that those doctors believed when told them that the drug would not cause any harm.
My understanding, I want to check whether this is the understanding you have, is that the indication was changed and the prop list was changed and the prop list was then sent to all prescribing doctors. Because
I would like to see evidence of that.
that was where the prop list was sent. It was sent to GPs,
Have you seen them?
doctors in hospitals.
It says quite clearly in the letter, from Shearing's, in Shearing's own words, quietly withdrawn without informing any of the medical profession. So
That's
that would
something we
indicate
will
to me,
clarify.
and that is in a Shearing's letter. So I would be very surprised if that's right.
Is that the McGregor Committee?
I think it is, yeah. It was
Yeah,
called the
Joint
Standing Joint Committee,
on
which was
Right
also not. They're responsible for MIMS, as far as I know, for the indications that were actually printed.
They were responsible for the prop list. I think they weren't
Okay.
responsible for MIMS, as far as I'm
Right.
aware.
No, possibly right. I think I've mixed the two up. I thought they were the same. But that is quite an explicit letter that they, and it is actually said, those words are with the approbation of. So he actually said, yes, you can do that.
So they said it wouldn't be reimbursed, is that it?
That's right. The original thing
It
came...
wasn't withdrawn, it was just said,
No, the indication-
we will not reimburse you for using it for that purpose.
The indication was withdrawn at that time,
Okay.
in February 1970. They actually withdrew the indication, and that's clarified in a letter from Shearing's that we have on file.
That would be hugely helpful.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. I'm afraid that was a really bad assumption on my part, that you would have been given all the information.
Right, Marion, that would be really very helpful.
Oh, I
Thank
shall
you.
make sure.
Can I just pick up
Yes.
one or two of the
Of
things you
course.
said? And thank you for that very clear exposition. It was extremely good. Thank you for that. Can I just say that you did have an ask of us that we should get the minutes of these
Yes,
meetings
please.
between the MHRA and the EWG, and certainly we will try and do that.
That would be wonderful.
For you, and we will try and ensure that we can do that, and also the minutes of the meetings that you were concerned about, and we will follow that up as well.
Thank you.
Can I just ask, the EWG meeting minutes are available on their website?
Not all of them.
Right, that's what I was about to say. There are some that aren't there.
As far as I know, the minutes taken during the secret meetings that we were excluded from, there was only the core group allowed into those meetings, have never been made public.
How many of those were there?
I think there were about 3 in total. I'd need to, because I did lots of notes at the time, which again maybe I should have sent those as well, because a lot of the assumptions, shall we say, that were made by the expert working group have no basis in fact. A lot of the information, and particularly the scientist who worked for Bayer, I had to write twice to ask him to be removed. And yet that process was supposed to be rigorous. They were supposed to have made sure that there was no conflict of interest. And the other thing that I did question was why BfArM were there. Now that's the German regulatory agency. If this was a UK investigation, that also was quite an inexplicable decision to make. So my feeling at those meetings was that there was a definite bias towards making sure that they did not find any kind of link. And the fact that they can now say, in hindsight, we always said there was a possible link. I would like you to look at the interview with Jason Farrell, where he actually asked many times Dr. Gebby why had it been changed to a causal. There was no time at all that she actually said, well, because we knew that there was a possible link. So again, this is very easy to say now. They're obviously going to defend their position, which is, again, another instance of protectionism.
Can I reassure you that certainly we are trying to work with Bayer?
Yes.
And secondly, we do have another oral hearing with the MHRA. We've had them once, but that was just about information that was given. But now we want to look at the regulatory system and how it works and all that. So thank you for your testimony on that today. The other thing I just want to raise is the point you made about women feeling guilty about having taken this medication. We've heard that often when we've been round meeting people who have taken Primados. And I just want to reassure them that really there is no reason to feel that guilt. You can only be guilty if you really know the consequences of what you're doing. and certainly they were not told the consequences. And any way we can reassure people, but I know it's deep, deep down, and that they do feel guilty. But really, certainly we don't agree with that at all. We don't think that they should feel guilty in any way.
I think they received that reassurance from the patient meetings that you held. And at the time, my feedback to you all was that the empathy that you actually displayed to our members went a huge, huge way to making them feel less guilty. I don't think that will ever go away because it's just there, it's ingrained now.
Mm-hmm.
But it certainly helped, and I think the fact now that they can see that really we didn't have a choice. We didn't dare to question our doctor so many years back because you were God, you know, that was it. The doctor knew what was best. But I suppose initially it was always going to be, why didn't I question? With this evidence, with the discussions with yourselves, I think now we can actually start to see that we actually were in a position that we wouldn't have been able to question anyway, because the answer would have always been, don't worry about it, it won't do you any harm.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, well, thank you for that. I mean, I think the real tragedy is that this meeting of patients and all the rest of it has taken this review to do it. And it is the patient groups who have actually been determined that somebody should listen to them. Mm-hmm. So we have listened. Clearly we can't tell you our findings yet, and that will come out in our report when it's published. But one of the things I just want to ask you, we were very careful on our terms of reference, and we had to get those agreed by the Secretary of State, which he did agree, and it was the previous Secretary of State, of course, Jeremy Hunt. So in those terms of reference, we actually said that we couldn't re-examine the science in terms of us as individuals, because we're not scientists. So that really hasn't been possible for us to do, but clearly we've listened to certainly witnesses and others, experts in the field, and I've been to your sessions in Parliament and heard, and the way that you've been working with your party group, and Yasmin and Qureshi and all that, so thank you for all that. But I just do want to ask you, I mean, you have been so thorough, you have gone into so much of the history of this, what's happened, and all the rest of it. But I'm just sort of wondering about, we've had reviews, the expert working group, the ad hoc group on silverfish, the MHRA and that. So just sort of thinking about this review, what are the things that you think we really should come out with? What would reassure your group, but also be fair to all those involved? And if you could say a little bit about that, what are your expectations of our findings?
I absolutely agree that the science cannot be revisited by this group. That requires people like Professor Hennigan, Professor Vargason, people with a huge background in research and looking at these kinds of cases. However, I would like to think that you take into consideration the reviews that they have conducted, look at the expertise that they possess, and then measure that against some of the reviews that will be actually reviewing their conclusions to see if the same level of expertise actually exists in the people who are actually chosen to do these reviews. I don't believe it is. Professor Hennigan in particular is actually head of evidence-based medicines, and the clue is in the title. That's his living, that's what he does all the time. So my wish would be that you actually look at the background of the people who are being included in both the ad hoc zebrafish review and also in the new reviews for the meta-analysis. I think that's really important. I feel that you already have an understanding of the failures with the regulatory authorities, particularly the historical failings, they are there, they're quite clear to see. I would also like to think that you will have some influence on current regulatory failings, which are absolutely endemic. They need to be reviewed independently. That needs to be a top-down review. We need to look at what kind of lobbying still occurs. And as I said before, it's not lobbying, it's bribery. They're going in and offering some sort of incentive to push these tablets. Sometimes these drugs are on the market when there's already a perfectly good drug available. I feel that the ties between the drug companies and the authorities need to be researched. One of the expert working group, MHRA personnel, on the group when the review was taking place actually left to work for one of the drug companies involved in the review. And that's the kind of thing that happens all the time. There's an incestuous link between drug companies, between regulators, that needs to be assessed. It needs to be looked at, and I think the only way to do this is to actually start to get all this information into the public domain, to have truly independent people, which I actually think this team is for the very first time, truly independent with no preconceived ideas, but actually putting the patient first. Let's have a look at what we need as opposed to what would make a profit, what would actually look really good in print. Let's get something that's needed as opposed to wanted.
Can I just say that one of the things that we are determined to do in the review is to not only examine the past, because history is very important, but we really are concerned with the future. And we think the future is just so important from the point of view of everybody involved, the medical profession and patients and citizens and everyone. So I'm going to pass on now to Simon.
Mary, thank you again for everything you've said today and previously. It's all, it has been and is extremely valuable to us. One of the things I was just going to pick up on the point you made about the 3 meetings of the EWG that were closed or which you weren't involved in. Did they ever explain to you or anyone else why those meetings happened in that manner?
Because it was the decision-making process which they felt we should not be involved in, and that included other scientists within the group. It wasn't just the observers, it was the other scientists as well. So this was basically more of a closed group. What those discussions were, we never found out. We just saw the recommendations at the end of each of those sessions. To try to query them was impossible because we didn't actually know what had been said. I did challenge, obviously, for a change, some of the decisions that had been made because I'd been in the discussions prior to those meetings where the other scientists had actually said this information isn't good enough. Where did you get this information from? The responses were, well, it's the best we could get. One of the presenters actually said, I can't remember, which I found astonishing, and yet that was taken as evidence, not as, well, this is the best we've got, or, oh, I'm sorry, I thought that's what it meant. And I've got all those comments. I wrote those comments as those meetings were going on. So how they could then form a conclusion. And one of the scientists actually said, can I ask why when you ask a question, it's always in the negative? Why do you always want to say, we have not found, we do not agree? And that, again, didn't win the minutes. A lot didn't win those minutes, but they're in mine. So, sorry, go on. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does. It does. It's helpful. And as Julia has said, we'll do our best to get hold of transcripts and minutes of meetings that haven't yet been disclosed to us or elsewhere.
And the raw data as well, please, if you could. Yes.
The other thing I was going to just quickly ask about is the issue of causal association as opposed to possible association. So, as you will have seen, when the EWG members came and spoke to us here, they said that whilst there are certain things they might have done differently and said and written differently, that it wouldn't have altered their conclusion.
They certainly did.
So do you have a view on what is it about the evidence? Is it that the evidence of causal association is not strong enough, or is it that the methodology they used to interpret that evidence was wrong?
It's virtually impossible to find a causal association. Unless you actually use these tablets on a human being, there will always be doubt. And this is something that they are aware of. This is why they changed it to causal. I did actually bring you a copy, and I hope I've actually put it in here, that shows the difference between causal and possible. There are certain degrees, which I think we mentioned last time. I did bring it with me, and I hope to goodness I have it. There it is. So there is an actual criteria from the Uppsala Monitoring Centre. Yes. So you have this. And again, excuse me, one thing I need to say is, one of the people I didn't reference last time was Tobias Arndt, who's been an invaluable member of the team. And he has been working exclusively as well for thalidomide. And what he says, it's important to reference the thalidomide case. Thalidomide is widely believed to be the medicine where the association to malformations are proven with a degree of causality. The latest research presented at a conference at the WHO in Geneva in 2014 says this is not correct, even for thalidomide. It is difficult to specify exact diagnosis parameters of thalidomide embryopathy. Thalidomide embryopathy can phenocopy genetic defects. That's a scientific term, but you'll probably understand that. One would have to accept that there may be other effects of thalidomide which are not being diagnosed, and there may be effects not due to thalidomide that overlap with the thalidomide effect. Now, we find it astounding that the conclusions of the report did not take into consideration those factors which were available in 2014, 12 months before the review started. Again, it is difficult to understand when the clear majority of epidemiological studies which demonstrate an association and were contained in the report were obviously not accepted as credible evidence of an association. So yes, to answer your question, actual 100% causality is virtually impossible without physically giving the drug and looking at the effects. They knew this. That's why it was changed.
So,
Just carrying on a little bit further there, how important is this understanding of causality, in your view, to legal redress?
I would say at the time of the original trial, it was the focus. Causality was the focus, absolutely. And again, in the documents, what the legal advice is to Shearings is we must try to disprove the causality because we are guilty in every other area. We're guilty of not doing enough. We are guilty of basically suppressing the evidence. We're guilty that we didn't take the product off the market. So the only way that we can actually look to mitigate the actions that we fail to take is to cast doubt on causality. Now, that was always a benchmark, if you like, in legal cases. That position has now changed, now that the legal profession are aware that causality is not something that can be absolutely proved. You've got to look at the degrees. The degrees mean our legal team feel that we have absolute cause to reopen the case, which is what we intend to do. Again, I'm really sorry, I've obviously not sent, you mustn't have seen those documents either.
No, but actually if they are to do with ongoing legal proceedings, that we are better not seeing them because they're covered by legal privilege.
Okay.
So I would not send us those unless you have cleared it with your lawyers first.
I will ask tomorrow, yes.
Thank you very much.
That's okay.
all right.
Yes, and you've already mentioned the meta-study and Hennigan and the fact that that's going to go before an ad hoc working group.
Yes.
Again. I just wanted to ask you really about your confidence in that process that's forthcoming. It will happen, I think, in March, I think April date that we've got. How confident are you about
I'm
the
not.
process and the organisation, and what would you be saying to them that would increase your confidence? What do they need to do to make you feel more confident?
The expert working group in the EMA, I would like it to be that scientists are actually not chosen by the MHRA, the Commission on Human Medicines, or the European Medicines Agency. Again, it's another pool of experts who are inclined to agree with whatever it is they're being asked to look at.
Who do you think should choose them?
Well, this is where the difficulty is. I think it should be independent scientists who actually put forward names of people that they believe are credible. I know within Neil's review, there were 2 scientists there that he knew and he had confidence in. And I know I was only available for the initial discussions, but I know in those discussions they were impressed by that study. They agreed with Professor Vargason that no, it wasn't conclusive, which he never said it was, but they agreed that the work that he had done was extremely promising, that there were indications in there, and the chair actually said that there were indications that there were evidences of harm. But it isn't conclusive. We know that. And again, the conclusive evidence is really going to be extremely difficult. But there are ongoing studies with Professor Vargason, and most certainly Professor Hennigan is absolutely going to refute any discussion that actually negates his conclusions. He is actually, again, redoing some of his studies, but he wants to include this raw data. That is essential.
Right. Right. Anything else that... sorry, Sonia. I'm just going to ask my team. Are we happy? Right. Mary, thank you so much for coming for a second time. Very, very
It's a pleasure, actually.
It's been so clear. And the conversation and the discussion has been really helpful to us. And we hope that we can help you with some of the requirements that you need in order to take this further forward.
That really would be so useful. And I think, you've got to actually look at, you've 2 independent scientists there. You've got Neil Vargason. He actually became involved in this through thalidomide. He was one of the ones that found the link to the thalidomide adverse reactions. And he became interested because he's interested in any drugs that, are to do with women. But he made it clear again at the very beginning, this is research I'm doing, I'm not doing it for you. However, I will share any results. And Carl Hennigan was exactly the same when I contacted him. And his response again was quite blunt. I shall look at it, but I will decide whether there's anything there or not. If there isn't anything that supports you, I will still publish. And I accepted those conditions. That is all that we want. And actually I felt quite disgusted by the remark by one of the expert working group who said, the poor things, we even kind of looked at whether we should do something for them. We don't want that. We want the truth. We don't want to be patronised. We don't want someone to say, wow, should we just do something and then they can feel a little bit better. It will make us feel better. The only thing that will make us feel better is the truth. That's all. And a decent regulatory authority that looks after people in this country.
I think your message...
I feel so personally.
I think your message is very clear. Thank you so much.
Please don't edit any of that.
Just before we part,
yes,
because we've got another group just about to come. No, don't worry. That's fine. I just want to pay a tribute to Mike. Because I think Mike, who's been your observer, but we know he's not just an observer, and that he puts a huge amount of effort into ensuring that you achieve what you want to achieve. So I just want to thank him for all the work that he does.
Thank you.
Right.
And that is appreciated because you're perfectly right.
Thank you.
Thank you very
and thank you all. But thank you for the opportunity again. I really, really appreciate it. And I really appreciate the other thing I must say is that you've agreed to see 5 more members of the association, which I feel again will be so useful to you to see the disparity in the anomalies that we all unfortunately suffered from. Thank
Yes,
you.
and I must say Daniel and Nikki
Oh, they
were
were
fantastic
wonderful.
last time,
Yeah,
and the courage and
that's what keeps me motivated. The courage of those two people every single day to get up, get dressed, go out, work. It's just,
amazing.
they put me to shame, that's all.